For the CRA, it is May 28th at 9:30 in the morning. Before we begin, Ms. Jackson, thank you so much for providing me with the legal statement. Let me read into the record. On March 20th, 2020, the governor issued Executive Order 20-69 as amended by subsequent executive orders authorizing local governments due to the COVID-19 state of emergency to hold public meetings using communications media technology and without the physical presence of a quorum until the expiration of the state of emergency. The state of emergency was declared in Executive Order 20-52 and declared locally by Leon County pursuant to Leon County Proclamation 2020-6 as has been amended. In this light, I would ask for a motion for the CRA board to hold CRA meetings using communications media technology from the effective date of Executive Order 20-69 until its expiration. Madam Mayor Pro Tem, would you sponsor that motion, please?
Absolutely. I move the recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. Seconded by Commissioner Richardson and Commissioner Bryant. Do we have Commissioner Matlow logged in yet? Okay, we do not, but we do have a quorum.
I'm here, sir.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Matlow, thank you. Good morning. Any questions on the motion on the table? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Passes unanimously 5-0. And again, let me thank the city attorney for providing the language to keep us in the right order. And the meeting is officially called to order. Mr. Tapper, do we have any agenda modifications?
Yes, sir, Mayor and Commissioners. We have one agenda modification. We have deleted item 7.04 at the request of the applicant.
Excellent. Any other modifications?
No, sir.
Any questions, members, to Mr. Tedder on the modifications? Seeing none, we will move forward. We are on 3.01 presentations. Mr. Tedder, I will hand it over to you to introduce.
Okay. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. We would like to have the chair of the Greater Frenchtown Southside Citizen Advisory Committee, Ms. Katrina Tuggerson. She will give her presentation as a result of our first virtual meeting about a week and a half ago. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katrina.
Tuggerson, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think, yes, this is my first meeting with everybody. I'm so glad to see that everybody's doing well through these times. Our update from Monday.
I think some people mute. I'm hearing a lot of feedback.
Yeah, can someone, and all of us go on mute, please?
All right, let me know when you're ready. Thank you, and I don't hear the, thank you. Okay, so at this, we had a meeting which was on the 18th, and I am not looking at my calendar right now, but it wasn't this weekend because it was a holiday weekend, but we had it the prior Monday, which we went through and we were in the mindset to go through our agenda carefully, and we were there for 4 hours. I did make note that I pulled all my notes together and we did very well. The committee was able to go through each agenda item carefully. We had deep discussion about it. I did notice that the CRA director, Mr. Wayne Tedder, they pulled the item that I was going to address, but that was pulled off, so we won't be mentioning that this morning. One of the things that I really enjoyed coming out of that meeting was, and I'm sure you guys will get a chance to talk about the facade grant, how the opportunities of new ways that we're looking at increasing that, because the program is not really is not really active right now. It's just getting the message out there a little bit more clear, and also to do new programming and for what fits now, so that the businesses will be able to utilize what is important at this time. We also had the opportunity to discuss even a emergency plan for the CRA or the CAC, what that would look like in a time like this. We recommended that we don't call it the COVID-19 because it can be a comprehensive plan to cover all emergencies that will come up, even if it was a hurricane response. So we had great feedback from that as well. At this time, I'm skimming over my notes right quick. I'm trying to sum it up as fast as I can. We also had the opportunity, one of the other recommendations was from the Business Facility Improvement Grant, is that we were hold on just one moment. From the Business Improvement Grant, and also from I mentioned the Business Improvement Grant, also from the funding that was from the activities, the large event funding, that the money would carry over. So we're looking at, it will increase by, I'm mixing up my papers here. It would increase by 2 years instead of the funding will be for 1 year. And so instead of losing the funding for large events, we decided to allow it to roll over. And that was also a win-win on that as well, according to your approval. And I think if Wayne, if anyone has any questions for me right now, I think that's it right now. I will stay on the line in case someone has questions for me.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, if I could just follow up on both of the items that she referenced as, I guess, additional follow-up from the board. The emergency provisions in our redevelopment plan, that is something that the Citizens Advisory Committee recommended that we include. Staff is very capable of including it in our rewrite at this moment. It doesn't create any stalls or delays in the process. And we would recommend with just a courtesy yes, that we can proceed on with including those provisions in our redevelopment plan as we move forward. The second part to this is the carryover funding for the BFIP program and the large event. We did acknowledge in our agenda materials, we did not state it in the recommended options, but we did acknowledge that we will be bringing back the rollover amounts when we have our budget discussions in our August meeting. So I did not want the CAC members to feel like that was left out. But we need to have those decisions and confirmations made as we're talking about the budget in its entirety.
And Wayne, thank you so much for clearing that up for me. One more point I would like to make. We also made a suggestion to, and I don't see it right here, but to also create a portal for submitting any type of projects that should come through to the CRA and creating a set process. Once that process is set in place, anyone that has any projects, whether it's from the north, south, east, or west, coming to and want any dollars from the CRA will submit their documents into this portal. Once it's submitted into this portal with a procedure, and they have put everything that's required for the CAC to view it, then we're recommending that it would come up to you in a timely fashion and also with all the T's crossed and I's dotted, where it won't go back and forth. And that will end my comments.
Mr. Mayor?
You're doing a wonderful job. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, you have questions?
Well, I wanted to say also that, Katrina, you are doing an outstanding job. I know it's not easy, and I know the other night you were there until real late. And I know this is a volunteer job, so we appreciate the volunteerism of not only you, but the other members of the advisory committee and all other advisory committees. Having served on, I understand. I do want to speak on that last point you made about the portal for projects. Prior to being elected, I had also registered a concern about knowing what projects are being submitted, because at that time we were being told that projects were not being submitted from certain parts of the community. And so I think that if this portal is in place, whatever gets submitted, it's submitted. If it's in a submitted status, it's in there, and so people know about it. And as it progresses along down to the point where it does come to the CAC and it comes to the City Commission, we'll be able to follow the progress of it, whether it's been submitted, whether it's been reviewed, all those kinds of things, so that we don't lose any projects. And I'm not saying that we are losing, but for the public, it seems that some of them are thinking that they may be submitting and it's not coming to to the light of day. So we want to, I think we want to address that by creating a portal where that information can be there. And as far as I'm concerned, the public could also be able to at least see the project along with the status. I don't think you necessarily have to get into all of the documentation there, because some of that stuff is probably is probably private to that company, but be able to at least see that the project has been submitted and a description of it and the status of it, I think would be real good to help our community see what we're doing and be able to understand and support it. But thank you all for having that discussion. I did watch all 4 hours of the meeting. I figure if I can give 5 hours to the county commission meeting, I could give 4 hours to our CRA meeting. So thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you. If anyone has any questions, Wayne, it's back in your hands.
Any other questions for Ms. Tuggerson? Again, thank you for serving. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All righty, Wayne, let's move on. We usually at this point in the meeting, we have public comment on agenda items. However, what we have been doing is recognizing public comment, obviously, as the items come up. We will move forward with the consent agenda. Wayne, has anything been pulled off the consent agenda?
Nothing has been pulled, and we've had one public comment on item 5.03, consent item.
That was my next question. Yes, sir, Commissioner Richardson, good morning.
I did get an email from the executive director, Mr. Tedder, with some comments on the agenda for this morning. So I just want to express that so it's in the record that we did receive comments.
Excellent, thank you. Certainly do appreciate it. See no further questions. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Been properly moved by, I'm sorry, Commissioner Bryant?
Yes.
Were you the maker of the motion?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Seconded by the Mayor Pro Tem. Seeing no further comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously 5-0. We are now on 7.01. Mr. Tedder.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. At your January CRA board meeting, you asked staff to come back and do a review of the appropriateness of multifamily development within the greater Frenchtown Southside district, and also identify some strategies to address adverse impacts of student housing within the district. Staff has looked at this. We've got a presentation from Bill Pobley, who will introduce himself in just a few minutes. But there's really two components of our recommendations. One is what you have control over in terms of funding. So the CRA does not make the rules and regulations or approve the developments, but you do approve whether or not a project would get funded. Mm-hmm. And so the recommendation for number one is that you direct staff to develop a policy that limits funding of multifamily student housing projects within a certain area of our community. Our thought is, when we say we develop a policy, is that upon the discussion today, staff will then go back and start working on the language, and then we will work that policy through the Citizens Advisory Committee so that they can have some input on the direction that we would like to address this issue. The second component deals with the land use compatibility, and I'd like to turn it over to Bill Pobley with the City Growth Management Department. He's done a lot of work in our community with folks who have concerns with compatibility issues, and I'd like for him to walk through what he's done up to this point. With
Wayne,
that, Bill.
Wayne, thank you so much. Commissioners, just by way of very quick background, this initial slide shows the locations in the CRA where multifamily development is presently allowed. That would be the green area. And this slide shows the location of student housing projects that have received CRA funding in recent years, primarily along the Gain Street corridor and also Macomb. To the point that Wayne was making, though, concerning compatibility, this photograph really sort of illustrates that edge between student housing, high-density multifamily, and lower-density single-family residential projects. So as we approached this task, we were really looking at ways where we could make that edge more compatible and to allow the two uses to coexist in a more compatible way. Now, the way we approached this is we did a survey of 14 cities throughout the United States. And what we were trying to do, frankly, was not reinvent the wheel. and look at what some of the best practices were in other cities that are recognized leaders in this area. And that resulted in sort of a toolbox of various options that we could consider for implementation in the city. And I'll mention just as a quick side note, this is actually part of a larger initiative that we're working on with neighborhood groups that approached us last summer concerning compatibility between their neighborhoods and adjoining commercial. But it's very applicable to the immediate question at hand about multifamily. So now I'll touch very, very briefly on some of the standards that we saw, the best practices in other communities. Something that was fairly common was the height of structures. The surveyed cities oftentimes dealt with that by requiring the upper levels to be stepped back maybe 5 to 10 feet, just to soften the massing from the adjoining residential homes. Lighting and the glare that it can produce was a very common issue that other cities looked at. They typically required lighting plans and manufacturer pet sheets to guarantee what the outcome would be. Many of the cities were also keenly interested in specifically multifamily next to single family. And in those cities, they crafted very specific development standards and design guidelines to help shape what the multifamily product would look like so that it blended better with the adjoining low-density residential. Road access was something that came up frequently as well. The idea, of course, being that if large numbers of vehicles exit via a local street that was only designed for low-density residential homes, that can harm the residential context of the neighborhoods. Accessory uses, things like dumpsters and large air conditioning units that can make a lot of noise, were typically regulated through setbacks from the low-density residential use. And similarly, backyard uses, for example, amplified music at nighttime, were sometimes prohibited if they were deemed to be not acceptable next to low-density residential. Quite a few of the communities were interested in engaging with neighbors at sort of the formative stage of the development process. So on occasion, some of the cities did require community meetings in advance of making applications. And most of the cities that were in the survey were also interested in CPTED, or crime prevention through environmental design. The idea being to design the development so that it hinders crime from occurring through things like open fencing or eyes on the street. Fences are a common feature in regulating compatibility, as was design review, and not just building design from the perspective of the public right-of-way, but also from the perspective of the adjoining residential neighbors. Drive-throughs were probably one of the more common issues that were regulated in the other cities, and that was focused really primarily on the location of the order box, how close the order box was to low-density residential, how it's oriented, is it pointing towards or away from the homes, and also the number of queuing lanes that were allowed near low-density residential. Several of the cities also required street trees throughout their jurisdictions. Probably the single most common feature that we saw was an emphasis on public notice. But frankly, the results of our survey showed that the city was really a leader in that area, particularly after some of the code changes that happened last year in the city. And landscape buffers are an extremely common feature, particularly with an emphasis on buffering tall buildings from the adjoining low-density residential. Many of the cities that we looked at also identified specific land uses, things like perhaps bars or gas stations or pet daycare facilities, uses that created very identifiable visual or noise impacts, and they were then prohibited from being located within a certain number of feet of low-density residential homes. And then finally, many local streets that lead to residential neighborhoods are at the corners of commercial districts. So the question becomes, what level of signage should be allowed on those local streets? And many of the surveyed cities address that by having limits on the size of signs, the number of signs, and whether they could be internally illuminated. As Wayne mentioned, those are the options that we have for this issue. But in looking at the various compatibility standards, some of the things the city is very actively doing. Others are issues where we could tweak our current approach. And then a few of them are new issues that are not in our code right now. Wayne, that's all I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bill. Mayor and Commissioners, just to kind of summarize, so Bill has been working on these compatibility standards with community groups in our community, in particular the ATN. This discussion needs to be expanded way beyond ATN and move into the greater Frenchtown Southside neighborhoods and all of those that could be impacted with these standards. So with that, this is going to be a challenging task for Bill. It's going to be a lengthy task, but I think it could be a very productive task for us to try to achieve with some compatibility standards. Bill, do you have any idea from a timeline how long it would take you to kind of get from where you are today to a finished product where we could bring back to the CRA board and the commission?
Well, Wayne, where we are right now is we have a draft ordinance that is underway. And forgive me, I'm getting some feedback. We have a draft ordinance that's underway. I hope to have that finished by the early part of next week. And then we've also reached out to the Chamber of Commerce. They have very kindly agreed to help us arrange a meeting with stakeholder groups in the business community, realtors, consultants, things like that. And we're hoping that that would happen by mid-June. So I think it's reasonable to say that by the midsummer, perhaps in July, we would have an ordinance that was both fully written and also vetted through both neighborhood stakeholder groups as well as the business community.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you for for the information, the research, and the presentation that you've done. I would just like to caution that that we don't bring the businesses in before we bring in the neighborhoods, because what's going to happen there is the business is going to make the case for what they believe to be true, but the people who are going to have to live there and who are invested there, we need to make sure that we have what their thoughts and what they want up first. Because what happened in the Frenchtown community is that student housing kind of came in kind of unnoticed until it was there. And so we do not want to repeat that. So, and I know that working with the neighborhood groups, it's going to be a very diverse group. You're going to have intergenerational groups that you're going to be working with. And we just got to really just get in there and get in there early, because it's not going to be one meeting. It's not going to be two meetings. It may take several meetings in order to do that. But we need to make sure that that they weigh in. I would say weigh in ahead of the business, because businesses will come and, you know, their lights go off at 5 o'clock, they're gone, but these people are having to live with every day and see what's happening there. So I would hope that, and in getting with the capital, with the chamber, there are 3 chambers in town. Make sure you're including all 3 chambers in these discussions, because that too could be a problem if you leave anyone out, because they all have targeted industries and companies and businesses that they work with. So we want to make sure that we are aware of that and that we are sensitive to those kinds of needs. And for any of us who've ever done any work with the residents of Frenchtown and in other parts, Southside, we are very aware of the uniqueness of of the people who live there. Well, I should say us who live there, because I live in Southside, and our culture, we're at our historical value and our past experiences. All of that comes to the table when you bring us to the table, and we've got to have that in order to have something that we can live with. So I just offer that as we go forward with this. I like the idea. We definitely, I personally don't want to see any more student housing popping up in residential areas like it did. But I understand that, you know, things happen, but we want to make sure we put some stuff in place to at least be something to help mitigate any opposition or risk. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Thank you. Yes, sir. Commissioner Richardson.
and just very briefly, I want to say that this is absolutely a step in the right direction. I just wish we had had this kind of discussion years ago, to be perfectly honest with you, when a lot of this development was starting to come to the neighborhood. We wouldn't have been able to stop it because it was private development. It was zoned properly, but at least we could have had a better product and it would have been more compatible with the neighborhoods that are impacted. It was interesting because one of the slides that was used under the use prohibitions is about a mile, maybe less than a mile from my house, where the guy has all these appliances stacked up and just has a fence around him. He eventually did cover the fence, but I know exactly where that is. I have to see that on a daily basis and know that it is absolutely incompatible with the housing that we have just across Orange Avenue in Medical Commons, for instance. And so I think that this is an absolute first step. I certainly want to see us implement some, if not all of these, and then see where we go from there. And Wayne, it's on the subject, kind of, but didn't we agree when the standard was being built that there would be some historical markers or markings added to that development along Macomb Street?
Yes, sir. We have Devin Levins, who's on this meeting, if he would like to give you an update on that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Is there a motion on the table?
Mayor, if I could.
Sure. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to remind the CRA board that we do have some legal evaluation which would have to take place as we explore the various tools that are available to meet the needs of the community, and to keep in mind the Byrd-Harris Act and the fact that we have to be sensitive and aware and as we develop different standards, whether or not we're placing an inordinate burden on the ability to develop. And in that, just making sure that legal is involved so that the evaluation can take place. Not that the tools can't be utilized, but there is a legal evaluation so that we can give you the best advice possible.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Is there a motion on the table for staff recommendation?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I thought you were looking to be.
I move staff recommendation.
Thank you. Commissioner Richardson properly moved staff recommendation. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Commissioner Bryant seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion on the table? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously, 5-0. 7.02, I'll turn over to you, Mr. Tedder, to make introductions.
Okay, item 7.02 is a request for the board to approve $150,000 of funding in the Greater Frenchtown Southside District for the fiscal year 2021 budget period in the amount of $50,000 for the promotional special events, that's small events, and $100,000 for the large events funding. What that will allow us to do if you go ahead and approve the funding for it today, it is a several month-long process, in particular for the large events, to go through a process, pre-application, understand what is required for the submittal, and basically it gears us up to allow events to occur immediately after the adoption of your budget in October 1st. Now, given the fact that we are under the concerns with the COVID-19, what I'm also recommending is that staff does not approve in any final form any events after October 1st until such time as the city has opened up to those types of events. So we can do a lot of the legwork up to the point, be ready to accept and approve those in final form if and when the time comes for us to have community events. So with that, staff's recommending option 1.
Wonderful. Is there any public comment on this item?
We have no comments on this item.
Thank you. Any questions, motions, thoughts?
Move option 1.
been properly moved by Commissioner Matlow. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Been seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Williams Cox. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion on the table signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Passes unanimously 5-0. We are on item number 7.03. Mr. Tedder.
Yeah, item 7.03 is a proposed series of recommendations to address our grant facade program that we've had in place for many years. As the new commission kind of took place and took over the CRA, there was a lot of focus on how effective this program has been in our community. We immediately, upon your direction, started doing door-to-door notice to try to get the word out to make sure that the citizens that could benefit from this program were adequately informed and had opportunities to come in and utilize what I think could be an incredible program for the CRA. Staff did a lot of work, a lot of legwork. We've got a lot of interest, but we don't have a whole lot of applications. And what you'll hear from Sheila is we have had a lot of applications, but I really don't believe they are doing the things that we envision this program to do, is to make a difference from the physical component of our community and also to serve our small and local businesses. So with that, I would ask Sheila to just go over the three areas that we have for improvements, and we look forward to your discussion. With that, Sheila, could you move into your presentation?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Sheila.
Hello, good morning. Thank you. As Wayne mentioned, based off of the CRA board's direction, we did look into trying to determine other methodologies by which we could help the program be more expansive or things that we potentially could do to try to improve the program. We did come up with quite a few potential improvements, things that in some ways we're already working on, and other things that had previously kind of been discussed before, or ways that we can expand the program. And doing that, what we did is we did break it up into three various categories, so to speak, of improvements. And hopefully you can see the screen that I'm sharing, and that information was included in your CRA board packet. We broke those up into several categories of improvements, which would be more administrative improvements, technical assistant improvements, and program improvements. And I'll quickly step through those fairly quickly for you. As you can see noted for administrative improvements, one of the things that does really need to happen, and we've already been doing it, is increasing the knowledge of the marketing of the program, potentially holding or ensuring that we host quarterly or biannually hands-on workshops. We can conduct bi-weekly or monthly business drop-ins, which we are already really doing kind of unofficially. When we see businesses that are about to open or riding through, we get referrals of different businesses to drop the paperwork or information to explain to them our program. A lot of that is already being done. I don't know if you're aware, but the CRA has in the past 6 months or a year been doing a newsletter that is published in the Capital Outlook. There we try to help provide the community with information regarding the CRA, what it is, various projects that we have, and the different things that are going on. Another thing that we could do if we drop down to administrative improvement number 2 would be to create a more efficient grant process. Sometimes the way that things are done paper-wise, a lot of times we get into back and forth with paperwork with the applicants and issues with the agreements or restrictive covenants in the mortgage documentation. With everything that has occurred with social distancing, we believe now that people will be more amenable to using more digital media methodologies, and staff would work with them on doing those things. We believe that some of that would help lessen the efficiency process as it relates to applications. Another thing as it relates to administrative improvements, and I'm very excited about this one, is training and assistance with the application and deliverables.
doing a real true how-to video on our website that'll explain to an applicant, not just the tenant or the property owner, because as it relates to these grants, there are many different players that come into having to give a full application, like contractors or subcontractors. And we're hopeful to go ahead and do a how-to video that steps each one of those individuals through what it takes to give us a complete application, because previously there would be a lot of iterations of the application not being complete. And we want to be as efficient and as helpful as we possibly can be to help make the program more successful and provide individuals with the information they need to give us what we need so that they can get to the end result, which is approval of the funding for the program. The next subset we have listed there is technical improvements. Again, a lot of times, because the way the application is done and based off of CRA and city requirements, there does need to be, when someone is wanting funding, there has to be what I call an apples to apples comparison in what individual is wanting to do. And we do require 3 bids for that work from the contractors. Sometimes contractors are the subcontractors. Sometimes the applicants or the tenants have difficulties with getting enough apples to apples comparison bids. So we're hoping that we can help provide assistance in some way to help locate contractors or subcontractors by working with some of the other sister departments like the City Sustainability and Community Preservation, the Office of Economic Vitality with the Minority Women Small Business Enterprises, the various trade groups, all of the Chamber of Commerce's, and just try to come up with a listed register. Let's say if someone is looking for a painting. While the CRA can give the recommendation of a painter, because that we want people to be able to select who they want and not necessarily give one person more than another, but have a listing of potential listers of people that can do the work. Also, potential applicants with the City of Tallahassee on the approved continuing services contractors or subcontractors list, and potentially with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulations, right? They're listed as who can do what work. Moving on to saying really doing a much better job, a more expansive job, and focusing on the partnerships and support from the Chamber of Commerce's, all of them, right? 3, the Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce, the Capital City Chamber of Commerce, the Big Bend Chamber of Commerce, the nonprofit entities, any faith-based organizations, and any other organization that would help us to get the word out regarding the program. And the listing there is not the only individuals that we would look to work for. We would be open to anyone that wants to help. As Wayne mentioned, with the BFIP program, we did do a very extensive marketing and foot soldier campaign in September. And that was, we utilized the faith-based organizations. I do want to mention that the CRA is already a member of all of the Chamber of Commerce's, and we have been working with them, getting the word out, and developing the partnerships. Also, we've made some connections with a lot of the faith-based organizations and foot soldiers there at the various faith-based organizations. Going on to the 3rd subset, program improvements. Here, we're talking about expanding the elements of the program that can be funded. Now, we did, as CRA staff, do an analysis of all of the CRAs in the state of Florida. We did do a survey, and I'll tell you that our CRA already really provides a lot in comparative analysis to some of the other CRAs. However, we still could do an even better job if you so choose to, by expanding the program to allow use of the grant funds for roof repairs or for limited interior improvements necessary for structural integrity of the building. If in your CRA board packet, it does mention how the program has over successive years been expanded a bit, most specifically with the hybrid of the business facility improvement program. However, even with that, a lot of times we do get calls from applicants where they're needing improvements to their roof or other things as it would help with the structural integrity of the building. Currently, that is not in the program. Moving on to the next thing, as we talk about the funding that we allow, under the program, we do allow an applicant or a tenant to get up to a $50,000 grant. Currently, under the Business Facility Improvement Grant, we allow a $10,000 no match. We have expanded that from what the commercial facade program was before. Before it was only as it related to your building or your structure. We expanded that in, I think, 2016 to not only include you being allowed to get improvements to your building, but actually to your site. What we mean by that is your parking lot, you know, doing standalone signage and those type of things. But and we expanded it to allow $10,000 at no match. What we're asking for, or what's listed here, is to potentially maybe further expand that to allowing the no match to be $20,000 of that allowable $50,000. But we want to ensure that we're not just getting improvements to, let's say, a parking lot, because a lot of the funds would be used just to do resurfacing. Some resurfacing projects may even cost, you know, $15,000 to $20,000. Our mindset is that, yes, we are open to potentially seeing what you would opine as it relates to program improvements and increasing the no match dollars from the $10,000 no match to $20,000, but staff, and we want to have some hand in that to ensure that all of that $20,000 doesn't necessarily just go to a parking lot. So in there, we're requesting or mentioning potentially we can say that a portion of that no match $20,000 be directed towards those improvements, but that we wouldn't let all of the funding go to just that. Also, the next thing listed is talking about these partnerships with the various financial institutions to leverage the Business Facility Improvement Grant funds to help applicants qualify for additional lender funding. And I don't know here if I can kind of read what's here, like work with the local financial institutions as a part of the Community Reinvestment Act requirements to help provide the qualified business facility applicants with loans as an additional source of additional renovation or operating funds. Because what we find, and when we look at the history of the program, even with the modifications that we made with the business facility improvement and allowing the first $10,000, what happens is a lot of times the applicants or the property owners really want to do a whole lot more, but sometimes they don't actually have that match money. Now, one thing I want to mention is this isn't a all or nothing kind of thing. We do allow applicants or tenants based off of your property to successively get funding up to that $50,000 cap. So what I mean is someone can come in 2020 or 21, provided that the program is continued, get $10,000, and we're keeping a tabulation for that parcel. You got $10,000, not that you're earmarked for an additional 40, but in a way there's potentially $40,000 that you successively could come back at a different fiscal year and get that funding up until you get the $50,000. The only amount that we allow at no match currently is $10,000. So we're talking about potentially trying to do those financial institution partnerships to potentially help get more people to, so to speak, get more bang for their buck with these improvements. I don't know if Rick wanted to kind of expand on that just a little bit, or Wayne, should I leave that one there?
Just keep going.
Okay, all right. So then the final thing that we're saying is let's just see how staff working on stepping through some of these improvements. Let's see how that helps the program, because in hearing from a lot of the applicants or property owners and tenants, they're very excited and happy and grateful for the project, for the program. So we're referencing doing these improvements, working on stepping through some of these based off of you all's recommendations on what things you like or want us to vet, and doing it as a one-year pilot program and coming back to you within 1 year, which we would like to go ahead and get started June 1st of this year, which is what, 2 or 3 days from now, and do it for a year. And let's come back with the data on if we made these improvements, what has that done to the program? Now, this agenda item did go before the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they did recommend approval of the item as it was, specifically with saying that we expand the no match, and there was and they pretty much agreed with everything with no comments. We did receive 2 comments from citizens as it relates to this item, and I'll do a quick synopsis of what those were. One person pretty much did say that they did not feel that the program was expansive enough and that it didn't allow for interior improvements and things of that nature. And the other one was stipulating that some of the items that we listed there had merit and some of them didn't, saying that the program improvements that staff listed had merit and that some of the items listed in the technical improvements had merit as well. So with that, we had some recommendations on this item. I think option 1 would be to approve it. Option 2 would be not to approve it. And option 3 would be to provide staff with further direction, and staff is requesting, along with the Citizens Advisory Committee, that you recommend approval of this item as submitted.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sheila, thank you. Great work, outstanding. I know that you and I, you and Wayne, and I think someone else from your office, I joined you on one of those foot soldier adventures, and we really determined that more was needed in this program.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you all for what you brought forward. I hope that we can deliver this to the community. My question is, what is the average time that it takes to complete the application? And if it's a long time, what can we do to expedite that?
Thank you. Like I mentioned, staff, we really, as soon as the individual starts calling us, we really try to quickly shore up or tell them the quickest way to get through the process. But the holdup has mostly been the applicants getting the contractors. That's really kind of outside of right now how the CRA can help. A lot of times what we'll do, because again, we can't really recommend someone. So what people will do is do public records requests for, let's say, an applicant that did a prior project, and we'll give them the listing of who they use as contractors and allow them on their own to kind of get in contact potentially with those contractors that may have done similar work under the program. So what I'm finding is mostly it's people not being able to get contractors to bid. Remember, there has to be 3 comparative bids. And a lot of times the individuals don't have the money out over the no match funding.
Okay, if I can follow up. Please. I know that with the city energy program, that the energy, there's an audit done, and then the monies that can be applied for to do the improvement. At one time, they would provide a list of recommended or certified contractors or whatever the issue was that was needed. Is that still available, or can some work be done with OEV to find out who are some of the certified contractors to speed this process up?
Yes, ma'am. We have listed doing that in our agenda item, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes, ma'am. That is one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do.
Because
provide some type of listing.
I'm hearing that on average it takes about 6 months. And if it's going to take 6 months, if you're asking for a 1-year extension, we're going to be halfway through that year before we can get anything done. And I will hope that we, can do it in a shorter period of time.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Dr. Bryant, Commissioner Bryant.
Yes, let me follow up. First of all, this is a great job, Sheila. Outstanding work. And I fully support the recommendations. I would like to know, though, how many, and we can do this historically and then going forward, capture the data. How many of the minority businesses that have access to the $10,000 have actually accessed up to $50,000 with match funding. And you don't actually have to answer that now, but this is just something to think about. And we've moved it up to 20, which is great. Hopefully we'll move it up to 20, which is great. But then there has to be match dollars between 20 and 50. So my question is, as we look at, from a historical perspective, as well as how we move forward for small minority-owned businesses, have they been able to actually do the match such that they can have access to the 50,000?
I would answer and say some, yes. And I can call out some of those easier, quicker poster children, right? Jay Morrell, Early's Kitchen, Mr. He was on the Planning Commission, Terrence Henson. Those are some of the ones I can think of fairly quickly. Mr. Beasley, Steve Beasley. So we have had some that have been able to go in excess of the 10,000 providing the match. But to give you a definitive, we probably would need to look through the actual listing or the data. But those are ones that come to mind fairly quickly.
I would appreciate that, because I want the program to continue to grow and people actually have access beyond just the grant portion in order to do what they feel is necessary for their businesses. So if you can just follow up with me on that, I'd appreciate it. But I'm fully in support of what you have here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Bryan, is that a motion for staff recommendation?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Seconded by Commissioner Richardson. Is there any other further comment?
Mr. Mayor?
Sure, Commissioner Matlow.
Yeah, first off, I just wanted to comment. I think, raising the limit from $10,000 to $20,000 is great. I mean, we know there's not a whole lot of great visual improvements you can do with $10,000 anymore. And as you really want to improve the neighborhood, I think that goes a long way. It was mentioned earlier about interior improvements. And I think as we talk with financial institutions, we have a pretty great opportunity to set up a program where people can apply for the outside facility improvements and use that amount that they're getting from a grant from the CRA to leverage for private funding that could also be used for interior improvement. So when we connect with our financial institutions, I think if we lay it out that way, for example, if they're going to loan $100,000 on a project and they're getting $20,000 from the CRA, we make sure that $20,000 is only used on exterior portions, but can be used as money in for the bigger loan that can be used on interior to really jumpstart some projects. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, the part of this, Sheila, again, excellent work. You guys have done a tremendous job, and I'm excited about the recommendations that you brought forward. What I'm most excited about is the financial institutions' interest in being, and we have not had that before. None of them have been willing to come to the table if they've been asked. And to read that several have expressed interest in being a part of this is exciting because, as you mentioned, through the Community Reinvestment Act, that's part of their requirement. But they have not stepped up to do that. And so I'm excited about that portion of it as well. That can make a tremendous difference for these businesses.
Yes, sir.
All again for the good work that you've done.
Excellent.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second for staff approval. Any further comment? Sheila, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously 5-0. Mr. Tatter, we are on 7.05.
Yes, sir. Mayor and Commissioners, Tony Brown Consulting Group has submitted a revised redevelopment proposal for the 400 block of West Tennessee Street and Virginia Streets, otherwise known as where the shelter used to be located. What I'd like to do is allow Mr. Brown to give you a very brief presentation of an update that he also gave to the Citizen Advisory Committee. The recommendations that we have before you are a result of the discussion with the Citizen Advisory Committee and reflects their comments. So with that, Tony, you have the floor and you can introduce your item.
Thank you, Wayne. And I'm reminded to be brief. I recall the last time I presented for this great body, the mayor told me afterwards, keep it brief and concise and crisp. So hopefully I'll do that and take about
the 3
5
B's,
minutes.
Tony, the 3 B's. Be brief, brother, be brief.
Be brief, yes, sir. So can you see my screen, hopefully?
Yeah.
Okay, so slide number 2 is just a quick recap, a reminder of we were before you in June of 2019. We responded to a notice of your intent to sell CRA properties, and that our offer, we submitted 2 offers. One, I don't know if you can see my cursor, 431 West Virginia, dealing with the site that is surrounded by property owned by Bethel. And then a cluster of properties was our second offer that I submitted with Sylvester Davis, that dealt with an offer on the shelter site where it was our intent to find and recruit a major grocer to the site. And you directed staff to negotiate a purchase and development agreement. And we are here to present at least one of those offers for formal conclusion, and then an update on the second one for direction. The third slide, we look at the site into 3 development sections. Site 3 is largely owned by Bethel. It is owned by Bethel, and they're tearing down the plaza to make way for the urgent care and clinic. We thought we had an initial setback. We were informed by Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. I can go on record now and tell you who the tenants are. Tallahassee Memorial Hospital is the anchor tenant. They've pledged to master lease the entire site, and they'll occupy the first floor for the urgent care. The second floor would be occupied by Neighborhood Healthcare Center, which is a federally qualified healthcare center. They'll operate the clinic on the second floor. We were initially told by TMH that given COVID-19 that they put all of their capital projects on hold, but they did provide a letter that I've been able to provide to my lender to say that they are committed to the project, and it's not a matter of if, it's largely when, and we hope that we'll be able to sign a lease no later than August. The second site, where you see is site 2, that's 3/4 of this site is owned by Bethel. The other quarter is owned by the CRA, and that's 431 West Virginia. And we're asking your permission to acquire this site at below market value. And then site 1 is largely owned by the CRA, with the remnants owned by Mr. Davis. That's given us a more square development and access to Virginia, either for the grocery store, and I'll share with you during the Q&A that we'd like to shift from the grocery store and work with one of your local nonprofits and to do a permanent farmers market. And in order to create some tax benefit on the site is to do residential workforce development above the full-time farmers market. And I'll come back to the funding request as I sum up the last couple of slides. So what we're asking is relocation assistance. Either the $625,000, 1 and 2 is broken down, for $350,000 to neighborhood. Neighborhood resources were strained by COVID-19. In order to enhance and incentivize their relocation to the Frenchtown site, I had to increase the budget to offer them relocation expenses and some other additional improvement expenses in order to make their move expense neutral. As you will hear shortly, in order to secure financing and to get a permit, we have to show sufficient parking at the current site. Previously, I mentioned to you that we wanted to create a landscape easement between the senior residential development and the urgent care. But in order to move now versus later, we have to show parking at the site. And if we then move to a new, if we then develop the bigger Bethel site, it's going to require us to tear up those site improvements, put the landscape improvements in, and to shift parking on the site that I showed you that is owned in combination with the CRA and Bethel. What to do next is the conversation I've had with your staff, with community representatives on how dense of a development, but what we do know that whether we go dense or we allow for surface parking, that there has to be improvements in infrastructure. particularly stormwater mitigation and an upgrade in water sewer lines. And so instead of asking for a large investment from the CRA, we thought that we would propose a collaborative approach to work together on the site engineering and see what those costs are, and then determine what is the highest and best use of developing the CRA properties. And then number 5 is just a point of clarification that we will likely continue our efforts to develop the shelter site. You didn't give a deadline as to when we could conclude negotiations. And so we're hoping that by virtue of your actions today, that we still have somewhat site controls that we can continue to negotiate with your staff on the improvements of the shelter site. So the next slide, as I conclude, shows how we would go about developing the urgent care clinic today. We would demolish the current Bethel Plaza building. We would build the urgent care and clinic building at the corner of Tennessee and MLK. Where we propose to put the landscape easement is where we would have to put the overflow parking in order to secure financing and a building permit. And as we then look to develop the larger Bethel site, we currently have the Bethel site where they it used to be a restaurant, and I think they presently operate their Veterans Outreach Center on about a third of the site. The other third is a sort of a parking lot and undeveloped. And then it is surrounded by the CRA land, is surrounded by the Bethel site. We do have the Bethel property under contract with an initial short-term lease with an option to purchase. It would be our intent, if you approve our options 1 and 2, if you approve options 1 and 2, it allow me to develop a budget on the urgent care site that would relocate parking to the Bethel land for future development, for our mixed-use development. And then whether or not the shelter site, we could work later with the staff to determine how far we can continue our catalytic development headed west towards Macomb, where in this picture rendering, you can see that we put residential apartments above the food market. And we've had conversations with the Frenchtown Heritage Hub as being the nonprofit operator of a permanent farmers market, where they have done this on weekends, and they have an opportunity to bring in small farmers and other small businesses on a more permanent basis. And the residential above the commercial basically allows for revenues to be generated on the property so that the commercial space can be free or below market. So that's in total is the request, and I can pause there, see if there are any questions. How did I do, Commissioner Richardson? Was I short?
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Wayne, do we have any public comment on this item?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, let's open it up for discussion.
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioners, any discussion? Mayor Pro Tem.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation of option 1 and 2.
I'll second that.
Been properly moved by the Mayor Pro Tem for staff recommendation, option number 1 and option number 2. But not option number 3, Mayor Pro Tem, just making sure I understand the motion.
Yeah.
Well, as I understood from the discussion, Mr. Brown is asking for option 1 and 2. I would ask staff, am I correct?
Yes, so the request was for options 1, 2, and 3. And Tony can give a little bit of further explanation for item 3. But as he moves forward with looking at programming the larger components to the west, this engineering study that he's asking for would cover that. Now, as Tony and I discussed this morning, there would be a need to do some engineering analysis if the site is used for parking up at this point under options 1 and 2. So a portion of those dollars may be needed for the completion of the urgent care facility. Maybe not all of them, but a portion of them would be.
Okay.
Tony,
So your recommendation then, Mr. Tedder, is that we do option 1, 2, and 3?
yes, ma'am. And if you allow us just up to that 150, and then staff will work through how much is released at certain times with Mr. Brown as we move forward with this process. It wouldn't be a carte blanche approval of all of the funds, but what's necessary to move the components that are in play.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem, is your motion for all 3 options for staff recommendation?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I'll amend my motion for staff recommendation option 1, 2, and 3.
Excellent. And Dr. Bryant, does your second reflect that motion as well?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Any other comment, questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Matlow.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, just a few quick questions on option 1 is the loan for the Urgent Care Center. Option 2 on the CRA property, will this come back again for additional funding to actually build what you're proposing on phase 2 for that site?
Mr. Tedder, you want me to answer the question?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Menlo, that's going to depend. I put in my budget funding to do the parking structure for the additional space for the urgent care. If we move towards the affordable housing, then there is an anticipation of additional funding in order to do the mixed-use development that we've shown before, which would include about 120 apartment units and about 13,000 square feet of additional commercial space. So the short answer is yes, that's a possibility.
Okay, thank you. The third person. Okay, yeah. I mean, my only. I mean, I know we have to work out the contracts, so my only thing would be to make sure, as we're selling land for $10, you know, we're kind of codifying what that means, like, and what the deliverable will be in the end, and where we're trying to get collectively out of there. You know, I'd hate to sell a piece of property for $10 and only end up with a parking lot. So I want to make sure, you know, as we develop these agreements, we're looking at the future and making sure we're getting the most out of good out of the public land. And my only other comment would be, I know this went to the CAC for as an informational item. So I guess the process after you develop the agreements, it would just come back to the process again, Wayne?
Yes, sir. So what you would do is basically approve in concept options 1 and 2, and staff will work with the city attorney's office as well as the applicant and come back with a final form agreement for your final approval at a later date.
Sounds great.
I was going to say, Commissioner Matlow, we're getting $10. You know, the county gets $1 for the fairgrounds.
Any other questions, comments? Motion on the table made by the Mayor Pro Tem is for staff recommendation, seconded by Commissioner Bryant. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously 5-0. Mr. Brown, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We are on item 8.01. Mr. Tedder.
Yes, sir. Item 8.01 is very similar to the previous request that we did for the Greater Frenchtown Southside District, requesting funding in an amount of $150,000 for both small and large events. And again, the same stipulation goes with the downtown funding, is that we would withhold all final approvals of any events until the city determines that we can safely conduct community events.
Wayne, the amount for downtown is a little bit different. It's $100,000 for large and $35,000 for PSC, 135.
Perfect, Sheila. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Tedder, do we have any public comment on this item? Mr. Tedder, do we have any public comment?
Oh, no, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No comments.
Move staff on option 1, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Richardson has moved staff recommendation for option number 1, seconded by Commissioner Bryant. Any further comment? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously 5-0. Mr. Tedder, do we have any other business to come before the CRA today?
No, sir, we do not.
Mayor Pro Tem Williams Cox, any final comments?
Great job to the CRA staff. I'm enjoying working with you all. I think that we're being progressive and careful as we continue to develop And great job to the Citizen Advisory Committee. Thank you for all that you all are doing, and look forward to continuing in this vein on our way up.
Wonderful. Dr. Bryant, Commissioner Bryant?
Yes, I ditto to Mayor Pro Tem, and I also want to commend staff for being proactive. We're thinking ahead and planning ahead, which will keep us equipped to move ahead. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Commissioner Richardson?
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, I've been here long enough that I can compare where we were to where we are now, and I'm just excited as to where we are and where we're going, and that now we will be even more productive with these CRA funds and enhancing those areas that we're looking at making better. Thanks.
Commissioner Matlow?
Yeah, first off, I just want to note how great it is to be home and do a 9:30 meeting and not have to leave the house. It's been great. Second, I just want to compliment Sheila on everything in the business facility improvement program. I think that's really moving in the right direction, and I think it's going to be helpful for a lot of people. Thank you.
Right. Hope everybody has a wonderful day. With no other business before the CRA, we stand adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Mayor.